The day Marcus Aurelius became the most powerful man on earth, he did not celebrate. He went to his tent, picked up his journal, and wrote one question to himself. He wrote, "What is the point of all this?" That question has haunted kings, farmers, prisoners, and philosophers for thousands of years. And right now, in this very moment, you are about to sit with that same question. Not because anyone is forcing you, but because somewhere deep inside you, the same fire is burning. You already feel it. Before we go anywhere, let me ask you something. Have you ever achieved something you worked very hard for, and then the very next morning woken up feeling completely empty? Like the goal was real, but the feeling was hollow? Like you ran a long race, crossed the finish line, and then stood there wondering, wait, is this it? If yes, then you are not broken. You are awake. And this conversation is for you. We are going to walk through something today that most people never sit down to think about. We are going to look at the question of purpose. Not in a religious way or a scientific way. Not in a way that tells you what to believe. We are going to look at it the way a river looks at its journey. Not asking where it came from. Not asking where it is going. Just observing. Just flowing. Just understanding. Let us begin. The universe did not leave a note. Here is something strange to think about. The universe has existed for roughly 14 billion years. Life on this planet has existed for around 4 billion years. Human beings, as we know ourselves today, have only been around for about 300,000 years. And writing, the ability to record our thoughts, has only existed for about 5,000 years. That means for the vast majority of existence, no one was even able to ask the question we are asking today. So think about that. The universe did not come with instructions. It did not come with a purpose label on the side. It arrived in silence. It expanded in silence. Stars were born and died in silence. Entire galaxies formed and collapsed in silence. And then, on one small rock orbiting one ordinary star, something tiny and fragile called life appeared. And that life eventually developed something no other known thing in the universe had. It developed the ability to look up at the sky and ask, "Why am I here?" That question itself is extraordinary. The fact that you can ask it means something. We will come back to that. The ancient world was already asking. Long before any great empire rose, before any temple was built, before any book was written, human beings were already wrestling with purpose. In the caves of what is today southwestern Europe, people painted animals on walls. They painted hands. They painted scenes of hunts. Scholars have studied these paintings for generations and still debate their meaning. Some say it was ritual. Some say it was communication. Some say it was joy. But here is what almost everyone agrees on. These people were making meaning. They were saying, "We were here. We existed. This mattered." That drive to say this mattered is perhaps the oldest form of purpose in human history. Move forward a few thousand years to ancient Egypt. The great builders of the pyramids did not construct those structures simply because a king told them to. The people who worked on those monuments believed they were part of something eternal. They believed that through their labor, they were helping a god-king pass into the afterlife, and in doing so, ensuring the world would continue. They had a cosmic role. Their work had meaning not just in the present, but across time itself. Now travel east to ancient India. Around 2,500 years ago, a young prince named Siddhartha Gautama lived inside palace walls surrounded by every comfort a man could want. He had wealth. He had beauty. He had power within reach. And yet, when he stepped outside those walls for the first time and saw old age, sickness, and death, he was shattered. Not because life was painful, but because he suddenly realized that no amount of wealth or comfort could answer the question that now consumed him. What is the purpose of all this suffering? What is the point? He left everything. He sat beneath a tree, and he spent years simply thinking, observing, listening to his own mind. What emerged from that sitting was a philosophy that has guided hundreds of millions of people across many generations. Not a philosophy that told people what to do, but one that asked them to look clearly at what is actually happening inside them. And the answer he arrived at was simple but devastating. He said, most of what we suffer comes from wanting things to be different from what they are. And most of what we search for in purpose is actually a search for relief from that suffering. That was not hopelessness. That was a map. The Greek who refused to stop asking. On the streets of ancient Athens, roughly 24 centuries ago, there walked a man who had no school, no office, no property, and no wealth. He wore the same rough cloak every day. He walked barefoot even in winter. His name was Socrates. He did not teach. He asked questions. He would stop generals, politicians, merchants, and artists on the street and say, "You seem very confident about what you believe. Tell me, do you actually know what you are saying to be true?" And almost always, after a long conversation, the person he was speaking with would realize they did not actually know what they thought they knew. Socrates believed that the examined life, the life in which a person actually looks at what they are doing and why, was the only life worth living. He was not saying that people who do not examine their lives are bad people. He was saying that without examination, a person is just reacting. They are moving through life like a leaf in the wind. They are not choosing. They are just being blown. He paid for this with his life. He was put on trial, accused of corrupting the youth and dishonoring the gods of the city. And when he was given the chance to escape, to simply leave and go somewhere else, he refused, because to run would have meant abandoning the only thing he believed in, the pursuit of truth, even unto death. He drank the poison and he died. And 2,500 years later, we are still talking about him. Ask yourself this: what would you refuse to give up, even if it cost you everything? That answer is somewhere close to your purpose. The Stoic in the storm. Let us stay in the ancient world for one more moment. Around the same era as Socrates, a philosophy called Stoicism began to form. It would go through many hands over many centuries, and one of its most striking messengers was a man named Epictetus. Here is something that should stop you in your tracks. Epictetus was a slave. He was born into slavery in what is now modern Turkey. He lived under the control of others for most of his early life. He had no freedom of movement, no freedom of choice, no power over his own daily existence. And yet, he became one of the most profound thinkers on the question of purpose that the ancient world ever produced. His teaching was this: there are two categories of things in life: things that are up to us, and things that are not up to us. Our body, our reputation, our possessions, what other people think of us, these are not up to us. They can be taken away at any moment. But our judgment, our intention, our attitude, our response to what happens, these are up to us. Always. No one can take them. He said that purpose is not found in what you have or what happens to you. Purpose is found in how you choose to respond to what happens to you. A man in chains discovered freedom, not the freedom of his body, but the freedom of his mind. And he taught that this interior freedom is the only freedom that truly cannot be taken. Now think about your own life. How many times have you blamed your circumstances for your unhappiness? How many times have you told yourself, when this changes, I will be happy? When I have that thing, I will feel complete. When those people treat me differently, I will finally feel at peace. Epictetus would look at you with calm eyes and say, You are waiting at the wrong door. East meets the question. Let us cross the ancient world and move to China. Around the same period, roughly 500 years before the Common Era, a teacher walked through a fractured and war-torn land. His name was Kongzi, though most of the world knows him as Confucius. The world around him was chaotic. States were at war. Leaders were corrupt. People were confused and afraid. And into this chaos, Confucius brought not a theory of the universe or a concept of God. He brought something almost shockingly simple. He said, "The purpose of life is to become fully human." What does that mean? He said it means to develop virtue, to honor relationships, to be genuinely honest, to treat others with care, to improve oneself not for personal glory, but so that one can be of greater use to others. He believed that a single truly virtuous person in a community would lift everyone around them. Not by preaching, not by forcing change, but by the quiet gravity of genuine goodness. He spent much of his life traveling from state to state, offering his wisdom to rulers, hoping someone would listen and build a more just society. Most rulers politely thanked him and did nothing. He died believing he had largely failed. But his ideas survived. They shaped entire civilizations for over 2,000 years. They still echo in cultures across the Eastern world today. Here is the lesson in that. Sometimes your purpose is planted in a field you will never see bloom. And the willingness to plant anyway, knowing you may never see the harvest, that might be the highest expression of purpose that exists. The long, dark night of the warrior. Let us now move several centuries forward to feudal Japan. In the culture of the samurai, there was a concept called Bushido. It was a code, a way of living. And at the very heart of it was this idea. You should live each day as if it is your last, not in a reckless way, but in a way that makes every action deliberate, every decision clean, every relationship honored. The samurai was taught to meditate on death, not to become grim or hopeless, but to become awake. When you truly accept that this day might end, you stop wasting it on things that do not matter. You stop being petty. You stop deferring the conversations you need to have. You stop postponing the life you want to live. There is a phrase from this tradition. It roughly translates to the way of the warrior is death. But what it actually means is something far more subtle. It means that only by accepting the reality of death can you fully understand the value of life. Now here is something interesting. In modern life, most people try to do the exact opposite. They push the thought of death as far away as possible. They avoid it. They pretend it is not coming. They make plans as if time is unlimited. But the warriors of old Japan had discovered something that modern psychology would later confirm through research. When people are reminded of their own mortality, they tend to make choices that are more aligned with what they actually value. They call less. They connect more. They forgive sooner. They create more honestly. Your awareness of your own ending is not a curse. It is a compass. The African philosophy that changes everything. Now let us leave ancient Asia and move to the continent of Africa, where a philosophy has existed for centuries that most of the modern world has only recently begun to understand. It is called Ubuntu, and it is most commonly translated with this phrase, "I am because we are." Let that land for a moment. I am because we are. This is not a poetic phrase. It is a complete worldview. It says that a human being does not exist in isolation. Your identity, your value, your very sense of self is woven together with the people around you. Your joy is connected to the joy of others. Your suffering is connected to the suffering of others. You cannot be fully yourself in isolation from the community. Ubuntu says that the purpose of life is not self-fulfillment in a vacuum. It is contribution. It is connection. It is the recognition that every single person is carrying something the world needs. There is a story told in several cultures across southern Africa. A researcher once gathered a group of children. She placed a basket of fruit a short distance away and told the children, "The first one to reach the basket can have all the fruit." Then she stepped back and waited. The children looked at each other. Then, without any discussion, they all took each other's hands and walked to the basket together. When she asked them why, one child said simply, "How can one of us be happy if the others are sad?" That child had understood Ubuntu before anyone used the word. Now sit with that. Most of what the modern world teaches about success is about individual achievement. Win more than others. Rise above the crowd. Be the best version of yourself for yourself. But these ancient African communities had discovered something that we are slowly relearning. That the deepest satisfaction a human being can feel does not come from personal triumph. It comes from belonging, from contributing, from feeling that your presence made someone else's life richer. The weight of the industrial age. Let us now fast forward. Let us come to an era that most of us have either lived through or were born into its shadow. The industrial age. The age of machines, factories, productivity, and efficiency. Something significant happened to purpose during this period. For the first time in human history, large numbers of people began living lives that were entirely organized around work. Not meaningful work, not creative work, not work connected to a community or a season or a craft, but repetitive, impersonal, mechanical work. A man who once made shoes from start to finish, who knew the leather, the thread, the shape of the sole, who handed the finished shoe to someone in his village, suddenly became a person who only attached the buckle. That is all. He never saw the beginning. He never saw the end. He just attached the buckle thousands of times a day, and something inside him began to quietly collapse. The philosopher Karl Marx, whatever you think of his politics, identified this collapse with great clarity. He called it alienation. He said that when a person is separated from the full meaning of their work, something essential in them dies. They begin to feel like a part of a machine rather than a full human being. This is not just history. Walk into any large office building today. Ask people what they do. Then ask them why. Then ask them if it matters to them personally. Watch what happens to their eyes. But here is where it gets interesting. Even during the bleakest periods of the industrial age, pockets of purpose emerged. In the coal mining communities of Wales, men who spent their days in darkness underground would come home and sing. They formed choirs. Some of the most extraordinary choral music in the world came out of those grimy, exhausted, coal-blackened communities. Not because life was beautiful, but because they chose to make beauty anyway. Purpose does not wait for ideal conditions. It grows in the dark. Viktor Frankl and the Deepest Test. We now arrive at one of the most extraordinary human stories of the 20th century. A story so dark and so illuminating that it should be required reading for every person on Earth. Viktor Frankl was a psychiatrist who lived in Vienna. He had spent years developing a theory of psychology that placed meaning at the very center of human existence. He believed, before anything terrible happened to him personally, that the primary drive of human beings is not pleasure, not power, but the search for meaning. Then came the Second World War, and Frankl was taken to the concentration camps. He survived multiple camps over several years. He lost his wife. He lost his father. He lost his mother. He lost his brother. He had nothing. He was stripped of every material possession, every comfort, every dignity that could be stripped. And yet, in the camps, He observed something that changed everything he thought he knew. He noticed that the people who survived the longest were not always the physically strongest. They were not always the ones with the best positions or the most food. The ones who survived the longest were the ones who had a reason, who had something they were living for, a child they wanted to see again, a book they had not finished writing, a question they had not yet answered, a person they had not yet been able to help. Those who lost their reason lost their will, and without will, the body quickly followed. He emerged from the camps and wrote a book. That book described his experience and laid out a philosophy of meaning. The philosophy is this: you cannot always choose what happens to you, but you can always choose how you respond to it. And between what happens to you and how you respond, there is always a gap. And in that gap is your freedom. And in that freedom is where your purpose lives. He wrote that purpose can be found in 3 ways: through the work you create or the deed you do, through the experience of something or someone you love, and through the attitude you take toward unavoidable suffering. Read that last one again. Even in suffering, you can choose your attitude. And that choice, that impossible, radical, terrifying choice, is itself an act of purpose. The fisherman and the banker. There is a story told in different forms in many different cultures. It has no single origin. It belongs to the world. A wealthy man from a great city traveled to a coastal village for his holiday. One morning, walking along the dock, he saw a fisherman sitting in his boat, the catch of the day already sold, the nets already cleaned. The fisherman was sitting quietly, looking out at the water. The wealthy man, puzzled, approached him. He said, "It is only midday. Why are you not still fishing?" The fisherman replied, "I have caught enough for today. I sold what I needed. The rest of the day is mine." The wealthy man could not understand this. He said, "But if you fished all day, you would catch more. You could sell more and save the money. After a few years, you could buy a second boat, then a fleet. Then you could open a processing factory. Then you could expand to other regions. You could build a company. After 20 or 30 years, you would be very wealthy. And then," he said with a smile, "you could retire. Come to a beautiful place by the water, sit quietly, and enjoy the rest of your days." The fisherman looked at him calmly. He pointed at the water in front of him, and he said, "What do you think I am doing right now?" Now this story is often told as a celebration of simplicity, but I want to tell you something deeper. The story is not actually saying that ambition is bad or that building something is wrong. The story is asking you a different question. It is asking, do you know what you are building toward? And when you get there, will it actually be what you wanted? Because here is the tragedy in that story. The wealthy man had forgotten, somewhere in the middle of his journey, what the destination was supposed to feel like. He had mistaken the vehicle for the destination. He had confused the road with the arrival. This is one of the most common ways people lose their sense of purpose. Not because they have no direction, but because they have been running so long that they have forgotten why they started running. The question modern science is asking. Let us now bring this conversation into the modern world. Because something remarkable has happened in recent decades. Science, which for a long time believed that meaning and purpose were beyond its domain, has begun to take a serious look at what they actually do to human beings. And the results are extraordinary. Researchers have found that people who have a strong sense of purpose live longer on average than those who do not. Not marginally longer, significantly longer. Their immune systems function better. Their hearts are healthier. They recover from illness more quickly. They are less likely to develop certain chronic conditions. Purpose is not just a philosophical nicety. It is, based on current evidence, a biological necessity. In one set of studies, Researchers followed large groups of people over many years and measured their sense of purpose through simple questions. Things like, do you feel your life has direction? Do you feel what you do matters? Do you have goals that give your daily life meaning? The people who scored higher on these measures were dramatically less likely to develop heart disease, stroke, dementia, and a range of other serious conditions. Something else was found. People with a sense of purpose were more resilient. When difficult things happened to them, which they do to everyone, they recovered faster. They were less likely to fall into prolonged despair, not because their lives were easier, but because they had a thread to hold on to in the dark. Now here is where it gets philosophically interesting. Researchers could not actually define what a good purpose is. They found that the content of the purpose did not seem to matter as much as the presence of it. Whether a person's purpose was to raise their children well, to master a craft, to serve their community, to make people laugh, to understand the universe, the specific content varied enormously. But the sense of meaning, the feeling that what I am doing matters, was what made the difference. This suggests something profound. Purpose is not something that can be handed to you. It is not waiting for you at the end of a checklist. It is something that must be felt from within. It is a relationship between you and your life. And like any relationship, it requires attention, honesty, and continued renewal. The Japanese island that keeps living. There is a small island in Japan called Okinawa. For many decades, it was studied by researchers because the people who lived there had some of the longest average lifespans ever recorded anywhere on Earth. They were not just living longer. They were living better. Active, mentally sharp, engaged with life well into their 80s, 90s, and beyond. Researchers went looking for explanations. They looked at diet, they looked at exercise, they looked at social connection. And all of those things played a role. But there was one thing that stood out above the others. The people of Okinawa had a concept called ikigai. It translates roughly as a reason for waking up in the morning. Not a grand mission, not a world-changing goal, just a reason. Something you care about. Something that needs you. Something that makes getting out of bed feel like it leads somewhere. For some people, it was tending to their garden. For others, it was teaching children. For others, it was making a particular kind of pottery, or preparing food in a particular way, or sitting with elderly neighbors and listening to their stories. None of these things were grand. None of them made headlines. None of them required fame or recognition. But every one of them created a thread of meaning that pulled a person forward into another day, and then another, and then another. The people of Okinawa were not asking, what is the grand purpose of my existence? They were asking, what am I needed for today? And that smaller, warmer, more immediate question was the one that kept them alive and present and engaged for an extraordinary length of time. Maybe the question is not as large as we make it. Maybe purpose does not always live at the summit of a mountain. Maybe it lives in the garden, in the kitchen, in the quiet room where someone is waiting for you to arrive. The man who built nothing and left everything. Now let me tell you about a man most people have never heard of. His name was Nikolai Pirogov. He was a surgeon who lived in Russia in the 19th century. He is not well known outside the history of medicine. But what he did changed the lives of millions of people. He developed new techniques for surgery that saved countless lives during wars and accidents. He established some of the first field hospitals in the history of warfare, bringing medical care directly to wounded soldiers, rather than waiting for them to be carried far away. He pioneered the use of anesthesia in battlefield surgery at a time when operating on a fully conscious person was the norm. He never sought fame. He did not build a dynasty or an empire. He did not write a manifesto about the meaning of life. He just showed up, day after day, to the bleeding and the broken. He applied what he knew. He learned more. He applied that too. When he died, he was celebrated by a few. But the ripples of what he did touched the lives of millions across generations. Through every advance in military medicine that came after him, through every surgeon who learned from the systems he built, through every soldier who lived because someone arrived to help them in time. He never sat down and declared his purpose. He discovered it by doing it. And that brings us to one of the most important things I want to say to you in this entire conversation. Purpose is not usually found by sitting still and waiting for it to arrive. It is found by moving, by trying, by failing, by trying again, by paying attention to what makes you feel alive and what makes you feel empty, by noticing when you forget to check the time because you are so absorbed in something that the hours vanish. Purpose has a feeling, and that feeling is your guide at the parable of the three builders. In the middle of a great city, many centuries ago, 3 men were laying stones for a new building. A traveler passed by and asked the first man what he was doing. The man looked up, tired and dusty, and said, "I am laying stones." The traveler moved on and asked the second man the same question. The second man looked up and said, "I am building a wall. I am earning my pay for the week." The traveler moved on again and asked the third man. The third man straightened up, looked at the traveler with something bright in his eyes, and said, "I am building a cathedral. And when it is finished, people will come here from all over the world. They will stand inside it and feel something they have never felt before. And that will still be happening long after I am gone." 3 men, same stones, same work. 3 completely different experiences of their own lives. The difference was not in what they were doing. The difference was in how far forward they could see, and in what they believed their actions were connected to. This is not a story about ambition. It is a story about meaning. The third man was not wealthier or more powerful. He was not laying stones any faster, but he was alive in a way the first man was not. He was present. He was engaged. He was, in the truest sense, awake. And here is what I want you to hold on to. You do not have to be building a cathedral. You do not have to be saving lives or changing the world, but you do have to know what your stones are for. You have to be able to look at what you are doing and trace a line from it to something that matters to you, something real, something you chose. Without that line, even the most impressive life can feel hollow. The modern trap of infinite options. Let us talk about something that is entirely unique to the world we live in today. Something that did not exist in the world of Socrates or Confucius or the samurai or the Ubuntu communities. Today, for perhaps the first time in human history, a large number of people have an almost overwhelming number of choices available to them. Choices about how to spend their time, what career to pursue, what values to hold, what kind of life to build, what to believe, what to eat, what to watch, who to be. And here's the paradox. More choice, research has consistently shown, does not lead to more happiness. It often leads to more paralysis, more anxiety, more regret. Because when every option is available, you become responsible for your own dissatisfaction in a way that no previous generation ever had to be. In earlier times, if your life was hard, you could point to forces beyond your control. The weather, the king, the gods. But today, with so many choices available, if your life feels empty or purposeless, the voice in your head says, "This is your fault. You had every option. You chose this." That is an enormous psychological weight to carry. And so many people respond to this weight by not choosing at all. They drift, they sample, they move from thing to thing, relationship to relationship, city to city, identity to identity, always searching for the thing that will finally feel right, always waiting for certainty before they commit. But certainty is not how purpose works. No one who has ever lived a meaningful life waited until they were certain before they began. The painter did not wait until they were certain they were talented. The parent did not wait until they were certain they were ready. The builder did not wait until they were certain the cathedral would be beautiful. They chose. And then they committed to the choice they made. And then they discovered, through the living of it, what it meant. Purpose is not found before the commitment. It is found inside the commitment. The river does not ask why it flows. There is a way of seeing the world that comes from the ancient traditions of China, particularly from a text called the Tao Te Ching, written by a figure named Lao Tzu. And it offers a completely different angle on the question of purpose. One that is at first deeply unsatisfying and then, if you sit with it, profoundly liberating. Lao Tzu said that the universe does not operate according to human-scale plans or intentions. It simply moves. It simply is. The Tao, the way, is the underlying pattern of everything that exists. And the deepest wisdom is not to force your way through life, but to flow with its natural movement. He used the image of water. Water does not decide to be powerful. Water does not strategize about how to get where it is going. Water simply moves toward what is lower, fills what is empty, and gives way when it meets resistance. And in doing so, it carves canyons, it shapes mountains, it sustains all life. This is a radical idea in a world that tells you to hustle harder, plan more carefully, optimize everything, never stop improving. But Lao Tzu was not telling people to be passive or to give up. He was saying something subtler and more important. He was saying that most of our suffering around purpose comes from fighting against our own nature, from trying to become something we are not, instead of becoming more deeply what we already are. You have a nature. There are things that draw you, things that feel alive when you touch them, things that make time disappear, things that call to you in the quiet moments when no one is watching and there is nothing to prove. That is your water finding its channel. The question is not, what should I be? The question is, what am I already flowing toward when I am honest with myself? The letters that changed a young man. In the early years of the 20th century, a young military cadet wrote letters to a famous poet asking for advice. The poet was Rainer Maria Rilke. And instead of telling the young man what his purpose was, Rilke wrote back and said something extraordinary. He said, "Live the questions. Do not try to force the answers. Do not try to arrive. Simply live with the questions themselves, honestly as questions. And then perhaps, somewhere far in the future, almost without noticing, you will find yourself living your way into the answers. Live the questions. Not solve the questions. Not escape the questions. Not numb yourself until the questions go away. But live with them. Carry them. Let them walk beside you as companions rather than treat them as enemies to be defeated. Because the question of what is the purpose of life is not actually a problem to be solved. It is a conversation to be had. A long, rich, sometimes painful, sometimes beautiful conversation between you and your own existence. And the quality of that conversation, the depth of it, the honesty of it, the willingness to keep going even when there are no clear answers, that is what determines not what your purpose is, but who you become in the searching of it. The question that unlocks the door. So let us finally arrive at something practical, because philosophy without practice is just decoration. If purpose cannot be found by waiting for it, if it is not handed to you by the universe or by anyone else, then how do you actually move toward it? Here is what the great traditions of human wisdom, East and West, ancient and modern, all seem to arrive at in different words. You start with subtraction before addition. Before you ask what to add to your life, ask what to remove. What are you doing right now that you do not actually believe in? What commitments have you made out of fear or expectation rather than genuine care? What are you holding on to that was never really yours? When you remove what is false, what remains tends to be much closer to what is real. Then you move to attention. You pay attention to what makes you feel genuinely alive, not excited in a shallow way, not stimulated in the way that a screen stimulates, but alive in a deeper sense. Engaged, present, connected to something larger than your immediate comfort. For some people, this happens in nature. For others, in creation. For others, in the presence of another person who genuinely needs them. For others, in the solving of a difficult problem. For others, in physical work or movement. For others, in quiet and stillness. The feeling is the signal. Follow the feeling. Then comes commitment. Pick something. Not forever if that feels too large. Pick something for now. Commit to it deeply enough to learn something real from it. Not dabbling, not sampling from the outside. Going in, getting your hands dirty, learning what it actually requires, discovering who you have to become in order to do it well. And then, somewhere in that depth of commitment, the question begins to shift. It moves from what is the purpose of my life, in the abstract, to what does this moment need from me? And that is a question you can actually answer. The monk, the merchant, and the mother. In a mountain village somewhere in the high places of Nepal, there lived a monk who had spent 40 years in meditation. Travelers would come from far away to ask him the purpose of life, and he would always say the same thing. He would say, "I am still finding out." They would leave unsatisfied. They wanted a cleaner answer. In a market in Morocco, a merchant sold cloth. He had been selling cloth in the same market for 30 years. He knew the name of every family that had ever bought from him. He remembered what cloth they bought for their daughter's wedding dress, for their son's school uniform, for the curtains in the room where their father died. When you bought cloth from him, you did not just buy cloth. You received a small ceremony, a greeting, a memory, a story about the fabric, where it came from, what it could become. He never thought about the purpose of life. He was too busy living it. In a small apartment in a large city, a woman raised 3 children alone after her husband died young. She worked 2 jobs. She cooked every morning before she left and every evening when she returned. She attended every school event she could, exhausted, sometimes still in her work clothes. She cried in private, she laughed in the kitchen. She grew old faster than she should have. When she was very old, her children and then her grandchildren would sit with her and she would tell them stories about her own mother, about the village she came from, about the hard years and the small joys, about how beauty hides in ordinary moments if you pay attention. She died surrounded by people who had learned to love from her example. None of these 3 people had a grand theory of purpose, but all 3 of them were living in a way that gave life its weight and its warmth. The monk, the merchant, the mother. 3 completely different lives. 3 completely different answers to the question. And all 3 of them, in their own way, were saying the same thing. Pay attention. Show up. Keep going. Let what matters to you actually matter. The fire you cannot put out. Here is the last story, and it comes from a real place and a real kind of man. In the forests of what is now Northern Europe, many centuries ago, before any of the great modern nations existed, there lived people who organized their lives around fire. The fire in the center of the home was not just warmth, it was light. It was protection. It was the gathering place. It was where stories were told, decisions were made, children were raised, and the dead were remembered. Keeping the fire alive was considered sacred. It was not merely a practical task. It was a covenant, a promise to the community and to the past and to the future that the life of the group would continue. There was always someone whose particular role it was to tend the fire through the night, to sit in the cold and the dark and the silence while everyone else slept, and to keep the flame from dying. This person was not celebrated or praised. They were simply there, in the dark, doing the essential thing. And when morning came, the fire was still burning. And because of that, the community could eat, could gather, could continue. I want to suggest to you that this is one of the oldest and most honest images of purpose that human beings have ever created. Not the person standing in the light with everyone watching, not the one being praised or celebrated, but the one in the cold and the dark, tending the thing that makes everything else possible. Your fire is already burning somewhere inside you. You know what it is. You have known for a long time. You may have walked away from it because someone told you it was not practical, or because you were afraid it might not be enough, or because the world around you was so loud that you stopped being able to hear it. But it is still there, and the question of purpose, the great ancient bottomless question that kings and slaves and sailors and philosophers and monks have all asked across every century of human existence, that question is not asking you to find something new. It is asking you to return to what you already know, to pick up the thing you put down, to sit beside the fire that is yours to tend, to stay through the cold and the dark and the silence, to be there when the morning comes, because the morning always comes. And when it does, the world needs its fire, and you are the only one who can keep yours burning.